and a warm welcome to Talking Europe. Well, he's dismissed climate change as a myth, he champions fossil fuels, and in the first 5 days in office signed executive actions to move forward with the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. If completed, that would mean pumping hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil from tar sands from Canada across to the Gulf Coast. American President Donald Trump promised to change the US climate change strategy, and it looks like he hasn't wasted much time. He has in the past also promised to pull the US out of the Paris Agreement. That was a deal that united almost 200 countries in a common goal to limiting global warming to 2 degrees from pre-industrial levels. So what can the EU do? Well, to tell us more, we're joined by Mr. Richard Corbett, a British MEP from the Labour Party. Across the table, we have Mr. Brian Hayes, Irish MEP with Fine Gael, sit with the EPP here in Brussels. We also have Mr. Philippe Lamberts, with Belgium MEP with the Greens, and Mr. Paul Rubric, Austrian MEP with the Austrian People's Party. Thanks to you all for being with us. Mr. Lamberts, let me perhaps start with your good self, given that you are from the Greens. How worried should we be about what we're hearing from the US President Donald Trump, that he could walk away from this Paris Agreement?
Well, totally worried. I know that some people said, well, you know, once he's been elected, wait until he becomes a president and you will see he will behave as a normal person. I never believed that. I took him seriously during the campaign. And also when I see his track record in terms of behavior, I mean, he's a tax cheater. Well, he did that his whole life, so that speaks for him. But also, he's behaved as a climate denier consistently, and also with what kind of people he's decided to surround himself with. I mean, Exxon has been the oil company that has been the most active funding climate deniers and providing, pseudoscience to basically, fear, uncertainty and doubt about climate change. And Tillerson, ex-CEO of Exxon, becomes is a Secretary of State. So he's serious. We should be dead worried about this guy.
Mr. Rubric also is worried. Do you think the EU needs to voice a reaction? What can the EU do?
Of course, you know, energy is a war on energy because, as you see, that Europe spent approximately 400 billion euro every year on oil and gas and coal. So fossil energy plays a huge role also in the military building up. If you see that Russia doubled the expenses for military, that Saudi Arabia built very strong military activity, for us it's very clear that what we paid out, it's not necessary. We can do it on our own. We do our renewable energy. We go in the direction of more efficiency of energy. And at least we also have seen that what he said on NATO, that also we have to build up our military capacity.
But at the same time, I mean, the US is the biggest producer of greenhouse gases. If the US walks away from this agreement, is there really any point, Mr. Corbett, of the EU ploughing ahead?
Well, we'd have to work together with the rest of the world to try and keep it as intact as possible. But let's not underestimate the fact that there will be resistance to Trump also inside America. Even in his own party. He may not get away with this, and if he does, there will still be some states, some cities, which will still apply environmental standards like the rest of the world to try and limit the damage of what Trump can do at federal level.
But I think that's we as Europeans have to stay together on this. I mean, there are all kinds of concessions made across the institutions and across the 28 member states to arrive at the position that we arrived at in Paris. We have that position. We need to defend it and hope that enough moderating, sensible voices in the United States, especially in the Republican Party, will put some barriers on what he is trying to do.
Mr. Corbett, we're just looking briefly. A lot of people, the UK, of course, has voted to leave the European Union. It signed that Paris Agreement as part of the bloc. When it leaves, is it going to maintain its environmental standards in line with the EU, or it'll be under its national sovereignty?
Well, the government has said that when the UK, assuming this still happens, that leaves the European Union, it will enact all existing European laws into British law from day one and then review them over time. Now, it's saying it will keep environmental standards, it will keep workplace rights. It's a promise, it's not a guarantee, because once you can change things unilaterally, especially if the British economy isn't doing very well, the Conservative government will be tempted to try and compete by social dumping, environmental dumping, fiscal dumping. I'm very worried about that.
Well, I think this is a very important issue because we had a very good discussion this week with Michel Barnier, and he made it absolutely clear, and rightly so, on behalf of the 27, that there can be no cherry picking in terms of the ultimate agreement that is done between Britain and the 27. And that is crucially on the question of dumping, either tax policy or race to the bottom, or alternatively on the question of walking away from international binding agreements such as Paris on climate change, and equally on the trade issues too. So it will be absolutely in the British interest to make it clear going into these negotiations that they are going to actually abide by the existing agreements we have. We wait to hear that.
We should take notice of what Premier Xi Jinping has said in Davos, not just on trade, but also on climate change, that China, which actually he is the first emitter now, will abide by the Paris Agreement, and he urged everyone to do so. And frankly speaking, looking at Trump, we should understand that the only thing that his administration will react to is pressure. I mean, words will not suffice. And here, the EU has to work together with China to exert maximum pressure because, well, you know, we are in an interdependent world. I mean, of course, Europe, China depend to some extent from the United States, but vice versa as well.
But briefly, how much is the EU living up to its responsibilities of this Paris Agreement?
That's another story.
Mr. Rubrik, do you think we're playing our part?
Of course, for us it's clear we did as agreement and we want to have a global agreement. And it's clear that Europe will act in this direction. We will insist that what was concluded should be also done.
A caveat on that, I mean, the commitments taken by all the member states, the individual national commitments that do not amount to the Paris objectives. It's not just that we should abide to the commitments, but if we want to abide to the commitments, the practical actions that have been committed to need to be reinforced, and Europe should do its part, not the whole thing, but at least our part, and we are not there yet.
Rather than waiting for others to join us. Well, one part I believe the EU was looking at this week here in the Parliament was protecting a pillar of our climate, the Arctic, a place where there's little denying of changes taking place. Last year was the hottest on record overall, and it led there to a record loss of sea ice and snow cover. Less snow means, of course, less solar energy being reflected away, and it leads to tougher conditions for locals and their herds. Our reporters Isabelle Romero and Anaïs Guard went to northern Norway to find out more.
In the Arctic Circle, global warming has had undeniable effects. 40% of the ice has melted in the past 35 years.
On land, you might see 10 degrees higher temperature, as we have seen now in Svalbard. And some of the fjords in Svalbard that used to be iced over are no longer iced over. So it's a dramatic change. And, you know, it's reflecting also what we're doing to the planet.
Global warming has changed the lives of animals. Food is tougher to find. Many reindeer have shrunk in size and weight.
You get periods of mild weather in winter. And when that happens, the snowpack will collapse, then freezes again and becomes very hard. And the hard snow is more difficult for the animals to dig through to reach the plants beneath.
The reindeer aren't only suffering from global warming, but also from the government's industrial policies. Norwegian law reserves 2/3 of the northern land for pasture. But mining and various industries are also authorized on those same areas. Indigenous nations who have lived alongside Arctic animals have had to abandon their long-time traditions.
First of all, the indigenous people are getting punished by global warming because few indigenous people have contributed to the climate warming. And then we have climate warming, and it's opening up for new industry. We believe they don't listen enough to our experience and our knowledge, because the indigenous people have knowledge of nature and climate and weather.
European lawmakers have adopted a resolution defending First Nations rights and protecting the Arctic. The text says no heavy fuel should be transported by sea. Meanwhile, scientists have made an unexpected discovery. Reindeer who have been struggling to cope with climate change may become a key tool in the fight against it. A new study shows that by eating vegetation over the ice, these animals help make the North Pole surface more reflective. This means solar radiation is bounced back into space, slowing down global warming. New data the European Parliament may now have to reflect on.
Well, of course, also in that Arctic region, there's a bit of a race for ownership and a race notably because of the oil that can still be found there. President Obama, he had put a freeze on it, if you like. Trump, unlikely to keep that freeze. Mr. Lamberts, are you worried there? We saw already he's moved forward with that Keystone pipeline.
I understand that part of the executive orders taken by Obama are irreversible, at least parts of them. But of course, what we know, and that's the International Energy Agency saying that, we cannot burn all the oil that we have on this planet. Actually, between 70 and 80% of the remaining fossil fuels on Earth cannot be burned if we want to meet the climate targets, which means what's the point in drilling the Arctic when we already know that even the easy oil, the cheap oil that we have in Saudi Arabia, that we have in Iraq, that we have in Kuwait, will already be too much. Actually, and tar sands, don't speak to me about that. These are the worst fossil fuels that we have, except for lignite. And he wants, Canada and the nice Trudeau wants to exploit them.
There have to be two clear objectives from the European Union's perspective. One is to ensure, and I agree with colleagues, that what we have signed up to is actually implemented. The other part is we have got to complete across the 28 member states the whole question of energy union. Paul spoke earlier about our dependency, the necessity
on fossil fuels today.
That's key. If we are going to do something in terms of really building up our capacity on alternative energy, it requires the grids to be there and the investment to go in.
And have we started working on those?
We have started working, but it's too slow, it's too patchwork, it's not actually going to lead to Europe being actually the kind of capacity that we need to create that energy into
But does that come down also to the economy? Because I believe even, Germany still relies heavily on coal here in the EU. And when he was economic minister last year...
The main problem is that member states run their own policy and there is too less solidarity on European level. And I think what we learned now that Russia and the United States will play their own game. And that's the reason why we in Europe have to stand together to bring our policy to a global success. And that's what we politicians have to achieve.
And again, the dependency is worrying because we see this Trump-Putin axis taking shape. And guess what? Russia is the #1 supplier to Europe for oil, gas and coal. So when you see our dependency, 30% of the 400 billion that you mentioned go to Russia.
How do we address that, though? What are we turning towards?
Well, we are under threat. So it's not just
renewable
climate
energy.
target.
We have to invest in renewable energy, but more importantly, I think we've got to get the grids right so that there can be application across member states.
That energy.
I come from a member state that is at the end of a pipeline, and we know full well the importance of having an energy supply. So we've got to get the investment in there.
But Ireland is, I believe, one of the first countries now in the world to sign a law that it will divest from fossil fuels. Is that a big step? Is that significant?
Well, at the end of the day, it is important because we still depend for coal as a percentage. But that has to, if we're going to meet our targets, we have to bring that to an end.
That's
and I think
expensive.
we've got to be clear, it is expensive, and the state has to invest as initially getting subsidies in place for alternative.
Germany is investing in renewables. Fantastic, it's gone up a lot.
Yeah,
But it has replaced not carbon so much as nuclear. Because their decision to step quickly out of nuclear. Surely we should be phasing out carbon first and then nuclear.
I also have a question because I believe a lot of the move towards renewable energies is focused on biofuels, basically using like wood chips and so on instead of oil. However, there's a lot of environmental agencies saying now that it's not just the wood chips that are being used. Trees are actually being felled. So the EU is not doing this in a sustainable way.
Well, I've actually been, because the biggest plant using that in Britain is in my constituency, and the wood comes from Virginia in the USA. And so I went to investigate myself, are these forests being harvested sustainably? Because that's the key. If the forests are harvested in a sustainable way, and if the mass of the wood pellets are from wood residues, the sawdust and the branches that aren't used for other purposes, that otherwise rot and go into CO2 anyway, then it helps. And if it's not, then it's, as you said, negative.
But
from what I saw, it was good.
Okay, so it is maybe one line of inquiry.
And it's increasing as a result, the area that's covered by forests, because people are now investing in forests and growing more forests.
However, we often like to give out about the US and how bad they can be in the environment, but it was the US Environmental Agency that signalled the alarm on Dieselgate.
Absolutely.
Since that happen, though, we still don't have any standard EU testing for our cars. And I believe Germany is now asking the EU Commission to look into an Italian manufacturer, Fiat, saying the same thing. We're gearing up for another Dieselgate. Why have we not moved on that issue?
I think it's a problem around the world. We have to see how we can get sustainable mobility and which technologies will come up. And, also by e-mobility, if it's driven by nuclear or by coal, power plants like in Poland, it's not a green movement.
No,
so it depends on which kind of energy we drive the sustainable energy. And I think the most important thing would be
and
to
also
create
car manufacturers not to fiddle their systems.
Yeah, but
Yes,
that is
the truth is we have to look for getting a system where we get continuous driving. The main problem in our cities is that every car is stopping at red light.
That can't be difficult.
That's the question that you ask. Why are we not doing the things? Because there's resistance. Of course, if we do the energy transitions, there will be winners, but there will be losers. I mean, companies sticking to the 20th and 19th century models will be on the losing side. And clearly, in the car manufacturing sectors, they have tried to milk the cow of diesel, for instance, for as long as possible, because, of course, it costs to invest into e-mobility or to transform completely the mobility system. It costs investment, and they prefer to milk the profits rather than to invest.
If you're going to make that transition, it has to be done in a sustainable way where there's opportunities for people who will obviously lose their jobs as a consequence. How actually that's going to be done through retraining and all of the issues around that, especially for large car manufacturer countries, which is such a central issue. So it has to be done in a planned way. And in a way that provides people with the kind of safeguards. Otherwise, you're not going to get popular
support. So are you
support.
advocating the planned economy?
No, but a diesel car at least is more environmental friendly than an e-mobility car driven by coal in Poland.
So small improvements then being made, but definitely a lot more to be done. Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it at that for this half of the show. But thanks indeed for joining us. Thanks also to you at home for having watched. Join us again after the news when we'll be having our guest of the week. See you then.